As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster in a video game.
Greetings, everybody. It's the Young Bucks, the most famous t-shirt salesman in the world.
Usually we're throwing super kicks, but today we're giving a super deal.
That's right. If you go to ProWrestlingTees.com/YoungBucks and you use coupon code ALLIN, you'll get 20% off your order.
No, guys, you're supposed to promote the whole of Pro Wrestling Tees, not just your own page.
Marty, why don't you stand there and you hold the camera like we said, huh? You stupid junior idiot.
Hey, I hope Okada beats you tonight.
Nice.
ProWrestlingTees.com/YoungBucks.
Video games provide entertainment for children and adults alike, allowing us to enter magical kingdoms and befriend characters as fictional as your fake-ass homies. A violent, malicious group like the Mafia could never be involved with this industry, que no?
Que no is right. Que no.
But, as I say, que vole, it's the G and Geek and you're watching Gangsters in the Gaming Industry. For those of you who don't know, the Japanese Mafia are made up of several groups or families in Japan that deal in organized crime. There are competing factions out there, though they often work together and can be found in most facets of the entertainment industry. The Japanese government has separated forms of entertainment into different categories. Video games just happen to fall under the exact same set of laws as porn and gambling. Given the industries on that list, it's no surprise that the criminal underworld has found a way in. There are plenty of stories of Yakuza involvement in the early days of the gaming industry. Board members with missing fingers, people being attacked, property being damaged, coercion, theft, extortion, ransoms, and legal protection schemes are just a few examples. Yakuza activity in the early days of the video game industry is not something that is widely disputed. What is disputed, however, is the extent that it affected the industry. I'll let you decide that for yourselves. In full disclosure, many of these sources are anonymous, as I'm sure any person would be when revealing secrets about their local mafia. The Yakuza connection to the Japanese video game industry is an open secret. Open in the sense that everyone knows about it, but secret in the sense that few people really know the specifics about who did what, when, and how. So which gaming companies are involved with the Yakuza? According to the book An Untold History of Japanese Game Developers, just about all of them. Suddenly, this advertisement from a while back where Mario gets kidnapped by Sega and Sony doesn't seem too far-fetched now.
What are you guys doing with Mario?
No! Leave Mario out of this!
And I bet you're just sitting there thinking that this kind of stuff doesn't happen at all. Fuck you talking about? But let me show you a little something from Red Bull's documentary about video game music.
その頃はね、なんかね、ゲームのコピーとかの会社もなんかそういったこともあって、開発っていうことを看板に出さないって言われていて、私なんてナムコの開発って言うな、言われると誘拐されちゃうぞって言われて、それで身代金の代わりに新しいゲームの企画を出せって言われるからとかってすごい本当か嘘か分かんないんだけど。
Pretty shocking, to say the least. And that came from John Kobazawa, a famous Japanese composer and sound designer for Namco. And that's just one story. We're just scratching the surface. Nintendo. Now there's a company with a very shady past. The Japanese government had been trying to ban playing cards due to their gambling uses for centuries. That's when, oh shit, I hope I don't butcher this name, Fusajiro Yamauchi began making Hanafuda cards, Japanese playing cards which have no number assignments. The government recognized that some form of cards was never going to be eradicated completely, and therefore decided that Hanafuda may as well be legal. Thus, Nintendo was born in 1889. And despite the government's hope that Hanafuda would not be used for gambling, each face was secretly assigned a number, and the legal activities commenced. In fact, the name Yakuza comes from a specific hand in an old card game, 893, Yakuza. The gambling industry continued to drive Nintendo as a company until the mid-1950s. It was at this time that Nintendo started looking into other options as a business. Come 1958, prostitution was banned in Japan. This had several unintended results.
Keep your whores in the rec room.
In Japan, as in many places around the world, prostitution is the oldest occupation there is and is very, very common. And of course, businesses like Nintendo saw an opportunity in this and began investing in love hotels. The sex trade is, after all, one of the mafia's biggest money makers, although it's not as lucrative as it was back in the days. Regardless, the dual uses of these hotels as places of debauchery and also places of marital intimacy makes it a very interesting line of business, and one that can fly just under the government's radar. It's obvious gangs will always be here.
See, man, that's just the way the world is, that's it. It's always gonna be gangs, man. There's always gonna be fighting.
And if you came to the conclusion like I have, then you're smarter than most. Because even the book stated, bear with me, I'm just gonna paraphrase this. The arcades have mostly disappeared now, but back in the good days, sometimes people will come in and try to open up the cabinets to check out the internals, or maybe just steal the coins from the day's profits. But if the mafia were running the arcades, some of the employees would fuck you up. It's not a good thing, but if that never happened, how would you prevent theft and piracy? Because of the forces that be in the industry, you can't reject the idea of taking action like that. If shit like that had never happened, the gaming industry wouldn't have developed as much as it did, so it's difficult. I'd like to leave Nintendo here to talk about another form of gambling in Japan that has close ties with the gaming industry. Chances are, you've heard of it. It's a little game called pachinko, a type of pinball machine. Don't forget, gambling is illegal in Japan. Because of this, pachinko players don't win money. Instead, they win little metal balls that come out of the machine, similar to a slot machine.
Slot machine, slot machine.
In the 70s and 80s particularly, the Yakuza were involved in prize exchange. Legally won balls were traded for prizes, which would in turn be exchanged for money at a pawn shop close by run by the Yakuza. If pachinko rewarded players with money directly, that would be gambling and thus illegal. Now how's that for a fucking loophole, huh? Still, pachinko is considered low or cheap entertainment, so it's regulated under the same laws as the commercial sex industry in Japan. Arcades are seen as being very similar to pachinko. In fact, pachinko players call their activities gaming, not gambling. The similarities between pachinko and arcades led them to being controlled by the government under the same set of laws, and, well, the Yakuza already controlled most of the pachinko parlors to begin with. According to one source, pachinko brings in more money for the Yakuza than drugs. That shows how lucrative these industries have become. Quick examples of video game companies that make pachinko machines look no further than Sega and Konami. It seems that arcades and pachinko really do go hand in hand. Like mantequilla and a hot tortilla. Speaking of Konami, there is a company that has been plagued by the Yakuza for a long time. Steve Kent gives an account in his book, The Ultimate History of Video Games, of a Yakuza clan that aggressively pursued ownership of the company. Konami's response was for the president Kagemasa Kozuki to call the block instead of the cops. And of course, the two factions quickly began fighting each other over the matter. Kozuki would soon go into hiding for a brief period of time, since the two rivals turned violent, setting off a war between the two. Sadly, my sources, all of them, are unable to name specifics. Nobody wants to name names or individuals. The gaming companies themselves are keeping everything under wraps. Believe that shit. Everything I found has censorship written all over it. Let's talk a bit about how most smaller companies get involved in deals with the Yakuza. It rarely starts as Nintendo did, a company connecting with the mafia immediately and indirectly. Yakuza involvement usually starts with racketeering. This is a method of coercion used to get a company to pay for protection. A company could pay the Yakuza to protect them from other gangs and hoodlums, other businesses who don't like the competition, or even to protect the store from the Yakuza themselves. It's often a lose-lose situation, but fuck it, what you gonna do? Get fucked up? Oh, I'd like to talk about another form of coercion the Yakuza used. They will steal and pirate games or remake them with few alterations and sell them as their own. One such game developed by Atari was called Breakout. It was sent to Namco to be made into an arcade. The Yakuza somehow got their hands on it and made an imitation game out of it and started distributing it. Ain't that some shit? Another story that circulated recently highlighted one of the biggest problems the video game industry has had with the Yakuza. One company kidnapped the sister of an employee of a rival company and kept her in an isolation room. Isolation rooms are basically solitary confinement prison cells. They had taken her as a ransom to keep the company from doing business with Nintendo. The strong arming didn't work, as this employee knew exactly who ordered the kidnapping. He didn't give in. and instead he smashed up a bunch of arcade cabinets of this opposing company and left it in front of their offices, showing he didn't give a fuck and he wasn't gonna get intimidated by a bunch of levas, you know? We all got our theories of who ordered the kidnapping, but we'll just leave it up to you. And this may be completely unrelated, but I stumbled across an interesting article from that same time period. And guess what? They too are huge for their use of isolation rooms. I guess you could say Sega really does what Nintendo don't. Gang violence and intimidation will always be around all over the world. And even after everything I've read, the early video game companies were just a bit more susceptible to protection schemes and intimidation tactics. I mean, Nintendo had to ship their Super Famicom units in the dead of night just to avoid them getting stolen by the Yakuza. But many current gaming companies have since broken the trend, becoming international and rising above the reach of the Yakuza. Companies like Nintendo, who as soon as possible expanded their business to America, Europe, and Australia, are able to evade the negative associations that plague many companies that have a hard time finding a foothold outside of Japan. The industry has largely moved away from the mafia in recent years, but that doesn't mean it's stopped. In ending, I'll just leave this little clip right here for all you so-called gangbangers out there.
Don't take it wrong, I'm not pretending to have any answers. I have youngsters myself. You try to tell them not to write on the walls, not to go looking for trouble. But you know how it is. They make the same mistakes that we did when we were kids. All you can hope for is that they learn their lessons a little quicker and that they don't fuck up too bad.
Anyways, that's all I have for now. Get the fuck on.